you're just joining us for the first time, here's what we do on the show. We take a look at the most talked about topics of the week and ask our expert panel to give us their fresh outlook. We start things off this week with the tension in the Middle East. Israeli airstrikes targeting Hamas in Gaza have killed more than 120 people, including many civilians, according to Palestinian officials. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will continue to pound Gaza with missiles until Hamas backs down. Let's have a look and talk it out.
3 days of Israel's conflict with Gaza, and the Strip suffers its deadliest attack so far.
We won't suffer fire on our civilians and on our communities and our children, and Hamas will pay a very high price.
8 members of one Palestinian family are killed in a rocket attack, 5 of them children. At least 66 Palestinians, including 50 civilians, have died so far.
What the government of the Israeli occupation is doing, airstriking civilians, children in their homes, is a war crime par excellence. This is contravention with all laws and international regulations.
As yet, there have been no serious casualties on the Israeli side. The U.S. and UN are urging both countries to show restraint.
Gaza and the region as a whole cannot afford any other full-blown war.
I've been in touch with both Prime Minister Netanyahu, with President Abbas, and with others in the region in order to try to see whether or not there is some capacity to be able to restore the status quo ante with respect to a ceasefire.
A series of rockets streaked across the sunset above the border as explosions rock Gaza City.
Joining us now are my co-host and former White House aide Dee Dee Benkie, Dr. Alain Sanders from St. Peter's University, and Scott Monje, the Foreign Policy Association. Excuse me. Nice to see you again, Scott, and of course Dr. Sanders and Dee Dee. Unfortunately, not a very happy topic right now. This is really exploding over there. Let's go back 5 years ago. 1,400 Palestinians died and 13 Israelis. Do we think that we're going to be seeing something on that level again? We'll start things off with Dee Dee.
Very possible, because Benjamin Netanyahu, I can't say his name, Benjamin Netanyahu has said, look, we are not backing down. We don't care about international influence. We are in it. We are in it to stop this. Hamas fired off a lot of missiles, and Israelis, they're just digging in. And I believe him. I think that Hamas needs to believe in the international community. So yeah, it could certainly escalate to those numbers or worse.
And to that point, Dee Dee, the UN Security Council is now calling for a ceasefire as well. Of course, Iran is calling for a ceasefire. Dr. Saunders, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, the UN always calls for a ceasefire and then does nothing. So, I think you have to put the UN in
I agree with you.
That's the protocol.
Into context here. But when you talk about the disproportion of casualties, I mean, there's a very good reason for that. The reason for that is that the Israelis invest in their people, and they've got bomb shelters throughout the entire region. Now, you have to ask, why does Hamas not do the same thing? They're certainly adept at building tunnels, and very sophisticated tunnels for smuggling all kinds of things. They know what the situation is. This is not a secret. And so why are they not protecting their own citizens? I mean, every time you hear the broadcast about so many civilians killed, the next question should be, and the press should be investigating, where are the commanders? Where are the commanders? And why didn't you prepare for the civilian casualties that you know would be inevitable? Why are the people living in open-air structures? Why are they not underground bunkers? And I think that's an issue that needs to be explored.
Let's not forget the Israelis also have invested in the Iron Dome missiles that you and I were talking about. And that certainly has protected a lot of Israeli civilians as well.
Yeah, there's a very large technological difference between the two sides. You have the defensive measures such as the Iron Dome missile system on the missile defense system on the Israeli side, and just the lack of an offensive capability on the Hamas side. They make a lot of noise. A lot of their rockets are actually homemade, and they have a range of from 1 to 10 miles. The ones that they more recently have gotten some possibly from Iran with a much longer range of like 70 or 80 miles, which can reach most major Israeli cities are within that range. It's not a large area that we're talking about, but their accuracy is so far off that they just don't hit anything. So a lot of them the Israelis can simply ignore because they're heading into a desert somewhere. And the ones that head towards a city they manage to shoot
I want to talk about where the Palestinians are getting some of their weapons. I mean, that's certainly a very good question. Anybody want
It's
to?
Iran.
But even when they don't hit anything, the problem is that even when they don't hit anything, they sow terror. You can't ignore a missile warning. You can't just assume that it's bad weaponry.
Yeah, it's like
you don't know
30-something
who's going to
missiles in
hit
an
you or
hour.
when it's going to hit you. So what the Hamas folks are doing is basically sowing terrorism. Now, the Israelis, again, have invested in their people. They care about their people, and so they have built an Iron Dome system, and they have built a whole series of bunkers and underground protection sites.
Well, let's talk about what both sides are trying to achieve, and that could probably take a full hour to discuss. But just in your opinions, brief answers here.
Just back to what you just said about where they're getting their weapons from. Hamas is actually in a very peculiar situation right now, so you would wonder why they would start things if they actually did start this. They used to be supported by Syria and Iran behind Syria.
Yes.
But then the civil war broke out in Syria. The exile leaders who were in Damascus at the time have kind of scattered all over the place. And then Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood was elected in Egypt. And the its origins is in the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. It's not part of it, but it has these old connections. And so they switched from Syria to Egypt. And then Morsi got overthrown. And that kind of left them as sort of an orphan there.
Okay.
So they may still have these ties with Iran, and I suppose they probably do. Though Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood don't necessarily get along that well.
And some of them are also homemade as well, actually replicated over some of the Chinese weapons.
Well, but also Iranian as well. Ed Royce, who is Foreign Affairs Chairman, said this is absolutely Iran, and it makes sense. I mean, because, in Iran, they don't care if these people die. I mean, they want to stick it in the eye of Israel. So that's what a lot of this is all about.
Right.
And they're not prepared. But they don't care if these people die. So, they're very much at fault here.
Well, let's follow up on that. What are both sides trying to achieve? Let's start with things off with Israel. Dee
Look,
Dee?
I think Israel's just trying to defend themselves. They've always had that mentality. I mean, they're very good, and they got the Iron Dome. Their soldiers are probably the best in the world. Their army, and they are ready to go in any time because they feel like they have to, because they're always being targeted. So I think they just want to survive.
And they live. They
anything.
live like that. I mean, I called a friend who lives in Tel Aviv yesterday just to see how she was, and she said it's calm. Everybody's taking a very calm but very cautious approach this week. But certainly tensions are in the air. Dr. Saunders, what do you think Israel is trying to achieve right now?
I think Israel is trying to achieve survival since the very beginning, including today. The immediate question of survival right now are incessant and constant rocket attacks by Hamas, which have not just happened during the past few weeks, but they happen every month, sometimes every week, sometimes every day. The media never picks it up. They only pick it up when Israel decides to retaliate or for the actions. But it's a constant threat. Now, no nation in the world would put up with this sort of indiscriminate, collective attack on its people. So I think Israel right now is trying to minimize the rocket attacks. Whether it can entirely eliminate it, nobody knows for sure. But at the very least, minimize it by simply going after the terrorist launches.
Well, I want to talk about whether you think Netanyahu's approach, because it's certainly a very bold approach this time, whether or not you agree with it. But let's just, what do you think Israel's trying to achieve, Scott?
Well, I don't think either side has any specific aims in this because neither side planned this to happen. And also, in regard, and I don't disagree with anything Dr. Saunders said, but there's also a lot that the Palestinians go through that don't get a lot of press. Just for an example, those 3 young Israeli students who were kidnapped a few weeks ago.
Which certainly is what escalated all this.
Yes.
Indeed. But in the process of looking for them, before they knew what happened to them, the Israelis arrested 400 Palestinians and killed 6. And that doesn't get any head.
I disagree with that. It got a lot of press. It was covered extensively. What's not covered are things like those rocket attacks. But what the Israelis did to search for those 3 people certainly did get covered, and it did get covered extensively. So I would disagree with you on that.
All right, Scott, finish your point, though.
So, yeah, I mean, there is a growing desperation at the more fundamental level. We tend to focus on what's happened in the last few weeks, and which has all been accurate. At the more fundamental level, they have a different perception of what's going on. The Israelis, I think Netanyahu in particular, sees the current situation as perfectly acceptable and viable in the long term. It's been stable up until a couple weeks ago. But the Palestinian view is that it is deteriorating, and they desperate, for the state that they were promised 20 years ago when the peace process began. And they see the Israelis as putting off negotiations, objecting if they do anything but negotiate with them, and then not negotiating with them.
Which is a good point, I think, because it has been calm, relatively calm in Israel, if you want to say that. They don't need to negotiate. Would you agree
Well,
with that?
until they killed those 3 Israeli boys.
Right.
I mean, of course they're going to be upset about that. And you asked the question, do you think that's a good strategy with Netanyahu? And yes, I do. Peace through strength. It's a Reagan thing. It's like, look, and plus, just like Dr. Sanders said, they're not going to sit there and be attacked 30-plus missiles in an hour and not retaliate. Of course they have to.
I think there's also a misconception here. It's not that the Israelis don't want to negotiate; it's that there is nobody to negotiate with. I think you have to take.
That's a fair point.
I think you have to look at the whole situation. I mean, basically, this is a regional conflict. Abbas needs credibility. Okay, all he can do right now, and all he's been able to do, is to offer promises. Now, promises don't ensure anybody's security. What he really needs to be able to do is to show that he has power to control extremists, power to make a deal that will stick, and that means that the surrounding Arab states need to provide support for him.
Which we probably
simply talking between the Israelis and the Palestinians won't do much. You need to involve the whole power structure, that is to say, the whole Arab states, and what are they willing to do to back up the Palestinians and to back up Mr. Abbas with real means.
But with so much turmoil in the area itself.
That's right.
Very quick
I
question.
would agree with that last part, but I disagree with the part about there not being anyone to negotiate with. Ehud Olmert negotiated with Abbas in secret without telling anybody about it, and they came very close to an agreement.
But he can't deliver. That's the problem. He can't deliver.
It didn't happen, but also Olmert was arrested or indicted and dropped out of office. Maybe
I don't mean to cut you off,
Okay.
because we are going to run out of time very quickly. Do you see peacemakers? Do you see what's the outcome here? I mean,
I think hopefully peace through strength. I think Netanyahu, is doing the right thing. He has to defend his country, so hopefully it'll work.
Yeah, I don't think there's any long-range peace proposal or peace agreement that will emerge from here, but we may get a new level of sort of stability and deterrence, which will keep the peace for a while.
Scott?
I suspect nothing positive will come out of this. I agree with what Professor Saunders just said about drawing in other Arab powers. And you also have to draw in Hamas, which Netanyahu objects to. In nonviolent efforts that the Palestinians have tried to make to shake up the situation and get negotiations going include this agreement with Hamas, trying to get into the UN and things like that.
And I tell you, we could probably go on this for the next hour, so I apologize for cutting you off. Scott Monje from the Foreign Policy Association, is always a pleasure to be with you. We're going to switch gears and ask this question next. Is the ultimate goal of the NSA total population control? That's what a new whistleblower is claiming this week. We'll talk it out after this.